everything comes to the floor in such a hyper-partisan manner?
I would argue that it's already in the Constitution.
We've overtaxed people.
People like to legislate by emotion.
It's important to address when the governor oversteps his boundaries.
I'll pull up my pocket version here.
1,000-page omnibus bills that nobody knows what's in it. This week on the Omnibus Podcast, Walter Hudson and I talk about St. Paul's new program of pure socialism to send $500 checks to 150 families as part of a test pilot program for minimal income or basic income given to people with no strings attached. And then we sit down with Jay Johnson of Buffalo to talk about his controversy of raising a 30 by 50 foot Trump flag atop a piece of construction equipment in violation of city ordinance. And then we break down the last couple months of the legislative session, now that we're back from break, generating these huge omnibus bills in committees, and how the Republicans and Democrats will likely end up negotiating tax increases and the budget. So all this and more on this episode of the Omnibus Podcast, where all subjects are germane. Well, in the news this week, it was announced that St. Paul will start sending families checks for $500 a month. They are choosing, supposedly at random, 150 families in the city that are going to be receiving these checks. But 75% of those families will be non-white. So they'll be Black, Native, or people of color. So they're randomly selecting them, but at the same time selecting them. And it doesn't say anything about income. So I don't think there's anything about income qualifications. And they're going to be doing this for 18 months, getting these families used to having this money before this program will end. Walter, what do you think about this?
I have a lot of thoughts in response to something like this. First of all, I would love to know what the selection methodology is. Like, how do you do random but not random? And then, so there's that question. What's the methodology? Secondly, how does this pass constitutional muster? Wasn't the entire point of the civil rights movement to remove racial discrimination in public policy? I mean, that was the whole point, was to end Jim Crow. What was Jim Crow? It was racial discrimination in public policy, segregation through public policy. Now here we are 60 years later, almost 70 years later, and the people who claimed the mantle of the civil rights movement, who claim to be acting as heirs to its legacy, are advocating for segregation and racial discrimination in public policy. Very bizarre. And then, of course, there's the economic angle, which falls on a couple of different lines. First of all, just from the perspective of a city council member, which I am in a city significantly smaller than St. Paul, this sounds like a terrible idea for a city, just financially, because you get your money from property taxes. These are not income tax funded entities. St. Paul may have, I'm sure it does have sales tax to some degree, but sales tax is a regressive tax. It's a tax that's paid at the very least by everyone, and probably regressively on those who don't have any choice but to buy locally. And so you're redistributing wealth, but you're not even doing it from the quote unquote rich to the quote unquote poor in this case. You're just shifting it from one person to another for what? Well, we know it's for political effect, but it's certainly not for any sort of actual economic benefit to the city. And then on an individual level, the fact that you're, as you pointed out, Jeremy, getting people hooked on the idea of having 500 extra bucks a month in their pocket and creating a constituency that a year and a half from now, when it's scheduled to sunset, will be coming with their hat in their hand and their sob story about how this is going to devastate their family and they've been kept afloat by this magnanimous municipal money. I'll tell you what, I work in a job where I manage a workforce, and right now we are having a hell of a time finding people who are willing to work. And a couple of months ago, people were banging down the doors. Now there's nobody. I wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that everybody's getting their stimulus checks. We're seeing unemployment benefits return in full force. Now you've got cities like St. Paul handing out cash like it's candy. There are economic impacts that we haven't even seen manifest yet to this type of socialism, even on such a small scale.
Yeah, I think that we should be really looking at the broad economic impacts of handing out free money like this. Of course, it's not free, it's taxpayer money. This money particularly came from a big portion of it came from the CARES Act, which was taken from all taxpayers and given to the city to be used for coronavirus stuff. And somehow it ended up into this complete 100% pure socialism model. There's a lot of good things that we think we do, like we ship, through the World Food Organization or whatever, where we ship like containers of grain to go to different ports in Africa to distribute food. We went out and packed food for the Feed My Starving Children, which sends those packets of food into markets in Africa. And you talk to people locally, and that is disruptive to their economy, right? The people that go to the farmers market every week to sell their grain don't like it when a container load full of grain shows up. My mom went and volunteered with Doctors Without Border type organization to go out into Africa, into Tanzania, to work at a hospital for free for 2 weeks every year. And then the doctors there said, you're no longer welcome because people don't come into the hospital for 6 months before you come here. Because when you come here, it's free, right? We have to understand how we're disrupting the economy. When you start doling out free checks to people, they don't show up to apply for jobs. I went into a pawn shop last week to buy a used video game for my daughter, and the shelves were almost empty. I said, what's going on here? And he said, when you send everybody $1,400 checks, people don't have to hawk their stuff. But come back in 6 months, and the shelves will be full because people are going out and buying stuff that they can't afford or justify normally. And so it's very disruptive to the economy to give out free money or to give out checks to people undeservingly or just randomly as some kind of trial. But I think it is going to cause a program that's going to be hard to kill. And in 18 months from now, are people going to say, well, I went out and bought a car that had a 3-year lease because this was going to help pay for that car payment for at least a year and a half till I got off the ground. And then, the next recession hits or something else happens and I lost my job and
Right.
You need to pay for my car.
Right. Yeah, this cuts to the heart of economics and money and what money is and what it represents. Price is a form of communication. It's in that number of whatever something costs is communicated everything you need to know as both a producer and a consumer regarding whether or not you ought to enter into a transaction. You may not know what the weather is like in Argentina where they're growing the beans for your coffee or wherever your beans are coming from. And you don't need to know. You don't need to know about the storm that kicked up that diverted the ship to get the beans to market. But what you do know is that coffee is more expensive now than it was 2 months ago, right? And so that's going to affect your decision as to whether or not you're going to buy it. The same is true of literally everything. It's true of housing. It's true of labor. It's true of wages. When you just give people $500, it sends a signal to them subconsciously that they can now afford $500 more of stuff, even though long-term, that's not true.
Yeah, and it's important to know for the listeners that this program is not unique to St. Paul. There are more than 24 cities in the country that are doing these test pilots for guaranteed income. And many of them are in California and, of course, liberal states like Minnesota. And some of them have been going on since early 2019. And this is this vision that was it Yang that ran for president, Andrew Yang. He wanted to do a universal basic income, which would mean every American adult would get $1,000 a month, taken from all taxpayers, and to just make that the basic income for everyone. And then on top, so instead of going after increasing the minimum wage to $15 a month or an hour, that we just give everybody $1,000 a month as a basic income.
Yeah, what that effectively does is it takes 1,000 and turns it into the new zero. because 1,000 now becomes the baseline. If everybody has 1,000, then that's the same thing as everybody having 0. So the value of the dollar has to go up to compensate for that. I think a big part of what's happening right now in my industry and throughout the economy with labor and having difficulty finding people who are willing to work is that the wages have yet to reflect the inflation that is taking place as a result of all this government spending. People aren't going to show up to work when they're not going to make significantly more. Because think about it. If you're getting paid, let's say $600 a week to stay home, then 600 becomes your new 0, right? If I'm offering you a job where you make $600 a week, well, there's no way in hell that you're going to accept it because you can get that for free. Now, if I offer you 7, it's the same as offering you 100. If I offer you 8, it's the same as offering you 200. And so now what you've done to employers is you've basically, by a factor of magnitude, increased the amount that they have to offer in order to attract a workforce. And, the left will sit there and be like, well, you should have been paying them more anyway. This is good for the worker. Is it really? Guess what happens when we can't hire delivery drivers? Guess what happens when you can't hire a cashier at your grocery store, or you can't hire somebody to work on an assembly line or to work at an Amazon distribution facility because they won't come into work. You're not going to be able to get all your stuff. I wonder if it's going to hit these ivory tower pontificators where they live when they can no longer get the things that they have delivered to their isolated quarantine fortresses because the little people who they claim to love so much are now not willing to work for the new price that they've set through public policy.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And this guaranteed income doesn't go away if you get a job, unlike, welfare. So it may not have as big a disincentive for people going out and finding work. But one of the things it does create is a whole new market for, let's say the payday loan people. They could say, hey, are you one of the families selected for the $500 a month for 2 years program? Come down to our store and we will write you a check for $5,000 right now. And then you can sign over that money to us, right? This is kind of like winning the lottery and taking the upfront much less, amount. And then you're going to, because give somebody $5,000 right now, they can go out and do some damage with it. And, they'll be broke next month. But that you may also have these, programs out there that would take advantage of people and get them off of their guaranteed income and just give them an upfront check.
Well, and can we just pause to reflect upon, because look, I think there are very few people, regardless of political persuasion, who would disagree with the fact that when you dump money on people, they're going to go out and spend it. I mean, we've seen it with our own eyes. You just described it walking into a pawn shop. What does that tell us about the difference between the so-called rich and the so-called poor? Might it have something to do with behavior? Might it have something to do with choices made? If it was merely a question of wealth distribution, then indeed giving somebody an extra $500 a month would put them where they need to be. It would make a systemic change in the course of their life. The fact that it doesn't is proof that the amount of money in their orbit is not the problem. It's what they're doing to earn it and what they're doing with it once they have it.
Yeah, I think this really highlights the need to have financial classes in high school, even in starting in junior high, and an understanding how people are either fiscally responsible or fiscally irresponsible. We all have friends who are constantly broke and have good jobs, right? They just choose to spend their money on different stuff. Maybe they like to travel. Maybe they like to, dump their money into a boat or an airplane, and that's their choice. That's the freedom that we all live with. But it doesn't mean that we should just start giving them more money to try to lift them up. We need to educate people on fiscal responsibility, and I think that starts with our schools. In other news this week, we have a a business owner in Buffalo, Minnesota, who is making headlines because he has raised his 30-foot by 50-foot Trump flag above his business on a crane. And he did this during the campaign, during the election, which didn't bring as much controversy as it has now, where he decided this last weekend to raise the flag again. And the city of Buffalo evidently has an ordinance banning such large flags or signs. And so they have started fining him, I think it's $150 a day to have this flag. He gave me a call. His name is Jay Johnson. He called me a couple of weeks ago and asked if I would come and speak at his flag raising event. I couldn't make it up there, but we've agreed to give him a call here and have him on the show. What are your initial thoughts about this, Walter?
So I've been aware of the flag for some time. I live close to Buffalo. I'm in Albertville, and my work area includes a large portion of the surrounding community, including Buffalo. And so I often find myself driving in that community. And of course, I've seen it more recently. And in fact, I saw it today when I was driving around in Buffalo. And so I knew this was a thing. And then I started seeing chatter about it on social media and about the controversy with the city and the ordinance and all these things that are going on. And at first glance, I was conflicted about it because as somebody who sits on a city council and is familiar with these types of ordinances and restrictions, I, of course, know that something like this is not kosher in most cities. You can't just decide that you're going to set up a crane with a huge flag flying in the sky above people's houses in the middle of a city without some sort of consequence or without a permit. But there was something in the back of my mind that prevented me from just going wholesale into this guy's wrong and he should pay these fines and the government is right. And it took me a while to figure out what it was. And then it hit me today when I was thinking about it. Here in Albertville, and this is related, I'll circle around. Here in Albertville last year, we had a massive demonstration in our streets where leftist agitators blocked traffic alongst our major roads, our county roads, without a permit, without announcement, caused a major disruption, kept people from getting to where they needed to go, be that the grocery store or their workplace or a movie. It doesn't matter. People have the right to use public thoroughfares, and they were blocked from doing so. What they did was against the law. They violated statute. They violated multiple ordinances. In the aftermath, on my role in the city council, I sought to pursue some sort of enforcement action against what I held to be illegal activity and what by the letter of the law was illegal activity. What I was told by our city attorney was that anything we do is likely not going to hold up through the process. It's probably not going to stand up in court. It's probably going to be overturned, and we may be sued and lose. And the reason why is because the courts they always err on the side of the First Amendment and the idea of political speech trumping all other considerations. Now, this is, of course, ludicrous because there is no inherent right to block traffic. It's not as though in order to be heard or in order to express yourself, you have to go out and stop traffic for some period of time. These are completely distinct activities. But yet, he's right, the city attorney, in that the precedent has been set and the courts have ruled that there are certain things that in any other context would be regarded as illegal, but if you can claim that you're doing it as a form of political expression, it's covered. And so given the fact that that's the status quo, that we apparently live in a world where these ordinances don't actually matter, I can't conscience the idea of this guy being fined $150 a day and being told that he has to take his flag down when you're not going to pursue these larger organizations that overwhelm law enforcement and block our streets. It's got to be consistent.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. I think that political speech is one of the most sacred speeches we have. So let's give Jay a call. And he just actually called me, so I'll try to conference him in here. So Jay, thank you for taking the time to talk to Walter and I. you had an event, you had a flag raising. I see on the CBS News, you and I spoke before you had that event because you'd invited me to come up and speak. Can you tell me about the turnout and what it was like?
We had about 200 people come up to the event. It was kind of short notice we put together. I felt that events were changing quickly, and I put the flag up, and right away a gal drove up in our yard, and she had tears in her eyes, and she said, "Thanks for putting the flag back up. It gives me hope." And I said, "Well, the best is yet to come." And so then 4 days went by, and we had vandalism. The 26 windows got broke out. And in the town of Buffalo, the Trump store, which was closed down, but still had a Trump sign, they shot those windows out too. And I figured sooner or later the city would want the flag down. And then they sent, a couple days later, sent a letter telling me to take the flag down. And chief of police came out, and I said, "Yeah, I'll take the flag down." But I said, I know there's 5-10 people complaining about it around town, and but I said, when I take it down, I said everybody's going to be mad, and I said the whole town will be complaining that my flag is, you made me take my flag down. So we put it back up and had a rally on Saturday. We called it the flag raising rally.
So at this flag raising rally, were there any counter protesters that came out to express their concerns?
A couple did. One during the event, and then later, after the event, one came out, and the intent was not to make people mad. I always say to people, those people that came out and protested or don't like it, I said, when they find out all the facts and the truth comes out, I said they'll all be together.
Well, I guess my question would be, look, it's remarkable the stance that he's taken in terms of saying just explicitly, I'm willing to accept any fines that they levy, and I'm willing to be cuffed, and I'm willing to be taken away to jail. I mean, that was the quote in the CBS story. I'm interested in what the motivation is behind that stance, and why you would be willing to pay so much in order to take this stance and make this expression.
Well, I'm one of the awakened ones. I know I did research for 4 months, and I know how this whole story came about, and people need to be awakened on what's going on, and the quicker we get awakened to all the facts of what's going on, the quicker we can come together.
Well, it certainly sounds like you've taken a note from Trump, where you can do something that raises the attention of the media and perhaps your city council and others across the state, and give yourself a platform to address your frustration with the direction this country is going. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Jay, for your time and for being on the show today. So when I talked to Jay originally, when he called me, he talked about how there were a bunch of windows shot out in his business when he put the flag up. And there was also a Trump store nearby that had windows shot out. And there's a lot of anger from presumably liberal,
from the people who won.
From the people, yeah, I was going to get again, right? The sore winners, which is amazing, right? I mean, when they lost in 2016, they were in the streets screaming, protesting. When they won in 2020, they were still protesting and upset. It's just like you can't win. And I think that conservatives have done pretty well with obviously we had the January 6th issue in DC where people were upset about Congress not putting up a fight on challenging some of the election irregularities. But other than that, I think so many other conservatives have just accepted and we're focused on 2022.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're so right. There's definitely a psychological, strategic, and moral distinction there where even as they were claiming victory in the election, much of the rhetoric, and it wasn't just, random people in the street with BB guns, it was from the likes of the journalists writing think pieces and talking heads on television talking about the need for truth and reconciliation committees and going through and making sure that Trump supporters pay, not Trump, not members of the administration, but you and me, normal everyday citizens, people, that we need to pay a price for having had the audacity to vote opposite them. That's definitely a characteristic of the one half of the political discussion in the United States right now.
Yeah, and it's certainly seen this in letters to the editorial boards writing, saying that Trump supporters need to stop being so racist and divisive, and they need to stop the hate. And it's right. Like, so we need to get over that. Well, I wish him well. It sounds like he's not going to take down the Trump flag anytime soon. And he's going to keep that going and just keep the fines going and perhaps may invest in some attorneys to challenge it in court and get a decision from the city council, which I'm told the city council is mostly conservative. So they have a majority of conservatives on the council, but they want to see their ordinances carried out.
Right. Yeah. I don't care how conservative, quote unquote, the council is. When you start pushing up against established ordinances and policies, I would be very surprised if they relented on enforcing the ordinance, because it would create difficulties for them going forward that they would probably argue this one resident is not worth.
Yeah. Well, in the legislature, we just finished up our Easter break, so we all got a week off because the legislature's been working so hard and evidently deserved it. We're back in the final deadlines for legislation now is this Friday. So if your legislation hasn't passed both the House and the Senate committees, then it's dead, and it'll really thin down the legislation that would actually have a chance at passing. A lot of the stuff that's passed the House by Democrats, because it's a Democrat majority, is crazy stuff that's not going to pass the Senate. It's a non-starter in the Senate. And then there's some conservative legislation in the Senate that is not even getting a hearing in the House. So we're going to be breaking it down into omnibus bills. Those will be likely coming out of the committees in the House and passing and then going to conference committee with the Senate and hashing out the differences. Now, one of the things that Republicans are really horrible at is negotiating, tax increases in budgets. Like overall, I think Republicans have continued to fail. It's mostly because Democrats want stuff like a tax increase for gas tax, for instance. And they say, we want a gas tax increase. And Republicans, all they can do is say, we don't want to increase taxes.
Right.
And they always end up kind of halfway down, let's negotiate. Oh, let's meet you halfway. So they get a tax increase on something. 2 years ago, it was the sick tax. We used to pay 2% tax on all of our health care costs. When we go to the hospital, there's a 2% tax that goes in and it's used for a bunch of other things that goes into the general fund, or paying for reinsurance or stuff, and some stuff that's not even healthcare related. That 2% was supposed to end, so everybody's healthcare costs would go down by 2%. Democrats wanted to make it permanent. Republicans negotiated, well, no gas tax, but we'll do a 1.8% permanent sick tax. That was the negotiation. That was how we ended up. And so we stopped the gas tax 2 years ago. Well, guess what? It's back again. The Democrats want the gas tax again. So it's never going away. Their asks are never going away. And the Republicans can't hold the line on tax increases. They just keep on negotiating this through the end of session. There'll be something that's going to happen again. And so Democrats want a $627 million increase in transportation taxes, whether it's tab fees, license fees, a mileage, fee. There's a whole bunch of things they're considering. And then one of them is a 5 cent per year increase to the gas tax, so 20 cents over 4 years. It's back on the I don't know how to negotiate this away, but Republicans are we start on the 50-yard line, and Democrats are starting in their end zone, and we always end up giving up the ball here.
Yeah, well, and the Republican activists and voters need to be savvy to the trick that's being played on them here, because when they cut that deal a couple of years ago to have a permanent sick tax in exchange for no gas tax, how do you think your Republican representative and senator spun that when they came home to the BPOU meeting or to the local, VFW get together, a luncheon? It was, oh, I stopped the gas tax. Yay me.
Yeah.
Give me money.
And they lowered the sick tax by 10%.
Oh, yeah.
It was supposed to go away. It was supposed to go away.
Yeah. So, this is a boondoggle where as conservatives who are looking for people to represent us, we're constantly being sold down the river, and then, being told that, it's actually a trip to Disneyland. And we gotta stop falling for that and hold these guys accountable to truly stop the growth and expansion of government.
And I had great concerns on campaigning last election cycle for 2020 because Democrats controlled the House, the Republicans controlled the Senate, and we were both campaigning on what we did. Republicans stopped these crazy, because the Republicans in the House voted against the sick tax. We voted against the gas tax. We voted against all the tax increases. Meanwhile, the Senate voted yes on all that stuff because they passed it. And so we voted on this horrible legislation that passed, and they voted yes on it. So how do you, as Republicans, and my Republican senator was out campaigning on the stuff that they passed, which I voted against. How do you go out there saying how horrible it is without trashing your senator?
Well, you don't. That's the bottom line. You don't. This whole party unity thing. Look, the party serves a purpose, and if it's not serving that purpose, then it fails to have the utility that commands some sort of overriding loyalty.
Yeah. Well, evidently Republicans in the Senate view things differently. I saw them passing a $25 million tax on opioids, as that was going to be, they're going to be taxing prescription drugs. They're going to be taxing grandma who's, dying of cancer. And she's on taking, opiates, and they're taxing of $25 million and using the money to fight crime and, addiction from street drugs, really illicit street drugs. And, I saw that as a big tax. And they saw it as a win for solving the opioid crisis. So,
well, and think about how regressive all of these taxes are. From the people who are constantly talking about how their holy crusade brought down from heaven is to equalize the playing field and bring equity and provide, larger stilts for the shorter guy so that he can see over the fence and all of this. The taxes that they're proposing. And the reason why they're proposing them is because that's where the revenue is. The revenue isn't with the rich guys. The revenue is with the rest of us. And so they have to pass a tax that's going to hit you, because there's more of us than there are of them by an exponential factor. And so if they want to raise the money that they need for all of their pet projects, then they're going to need to come after the poorest of the poor. And so that's what they're doing.
Well, so this week we're meeting, we have final meetings where we're going to be what they call marking up the omnibus bills. So each of the 31 committees, well, a good deal of them are constructing omnibus bills. And in the healthcare committee that I serve in and the energy committee. These are going to be hundreds of pages long. All the bills that they've heard this year that we never voted on will be piled into this thing. And for some reason, I'm not seeing any. You're able to hear me, right?
Yep.
I don't know why my line isn't moving when I'm talking.
Yeah, I haven't seen any movement on. Well, there's mine. Yeah, I don't
see
see
yours,
movement
but
on yours, but I hear
mine.
you though.
I
don't know how I could be hearing you and it not be recording.
Well, I hope it's working. So in the healthcare committee, then we'll be hearing all of the amendments from the minority. So all of us Republicans will be offering amendments to the bills, and of course they'll all be voted down because we're in the minority. That's kind of how it works. And then we'll be taking one vote on each of these omnibus bills in the committee, up or down, yes or no. Do you want all these things to pass all as one big bill? And then it'll come to the floor where we'll be offering basically the same amendments again to get all of the Democrats on record of voting against these conservative amendments to these bills. And then throughout the rest of the session, as we debate these bills, Governor Walz will likely threaten the Republican Senate to go his way, agree to tax increases, or he's not going to give up his emergency powers, and use that as leverage to kind of work things through the end of the session. And that's kind of how I see things playing out. It's not going to be great for Republicans, and these emergency powers are going to be used as leverage, as a political tool, and have nothing to do with the health of the public. And he's going to continue to pressure the Republicans in the Senate to cave on some gas tax or some increase in income taxes, corporate tax or fees. Maybe they'll say, well, we didn't agree on taxes, but we agreed to increase the fees for electric vehicles, but then also maybe a mileage tax or something. I mean, that's kind of how I see it. I'm going to be voting no on any tax increase. I don't see a reason when we have this enormous surplus, but that's kind of how I see things playing out between the Republicans in the Senate and the governor and the Speaker of the House.
Yeah, I can't wait for next session when the Republicans come out and with their proposed massive decrease to both taxing and spending and have to negotiate in the other direction. Oh, wait, no, that's never going to happen.
Well, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Omnibus Podcast. Walter Hudson and I will be back next week, and we will be diving deep into education policy and these initiatives in schools to bring equity and focus on race and racism and division in our schools. We'll be talking with the Director of Policy of Ed Choice, Jason Bedrick, and we'll also be digging into omnibus bills as they start to come out of the committees, perhaps peeling apart the layers of the health policy and finance omnibus bill, or we can look into the energy omnibus bill as we debate it later this week, and perhaps they start coming to the floor. All this and more on the next episode of the Omnibus Podcast, where all subjects are germane.